Century 21, December 24. It's more deadly than smallpox, scarier than Ebola, and more transmissible than any virus scientists have ever seen. Still, those that know, and there are few of them, know very little about it yet. Disease X, as it's named, seems to be a viral infection of the brain, but it's also very unique. These are the notes of Dr. Jonas Pfester of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, written on Christmas Eve 2022. This is before there are any cases in the U.S., with the first patient seemingly coming from the country of Thailand. Dr. Thitiporn Bangsabat of Thailand's Department of Disease Control reported a number of cases in Chiang Mai, in the north of Thailand. The infected patients come from a large psychiatric hospital named Swan Prajau, the Garden of God. There were over 3,000 patients in total at the hospital, mostly from the north, but also other areas of Thailand. All infected patients plus staff were contained in one ward. The doors were bolted. There were bars on the windows. 27 patients were on the ward, all were infected, plus 3 staff. Patients suffering from various conditions, including psychosis, major depressive disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, uncomplicated and complicated drug withdrawal, and delirium tremens. 2 of the alcohol patients were strapped to gurneys. Dr. Pfester wipes the sweat from his brow as he looks at the report. He's never read anything quite so disturbing. When the outbreak occurred, or at least when symptoms started to show, the patients were locked in the ward. Pfester tries to imagine the scene in the hospital. The initial symptoms were vomiting and confusion, as well as headache. This progressed to hallucinations in patients not previously diagnosed with psychosis or suffering from severe alcohol withdrawal. Patients were feverish, after which excitability progressed to anger, as Thitiporn explained, a kind of fury the doctors had not seen in their mental patients. The patients subsequently attacked each other in what seemed like delirious states of mind. Some suffered serious injuries, including possible broken bones, losing eyes as they were gouged out, and lacerations to the skin, face, and trunk, all due to scratching and biting, since no viable weapons were available on the ward. Doctors tried to communicate with the patients, which proved impossible. It also seemed the patients had lost the ability to speak and possibly hear. Pfester knows that during the acute phase of encephalitis, patients can become aggressive and have been known to cause harm to others, but the psychiatric problems displayed in Thailand were extreme and entirely unique, as was the seeming hypertransmissibility of the virus. If the encephalitis was viral, thinks Pfester, nothing in medical literature can explain what happened in the ward, if what happened was encephalitis. The symptoms of aggression could have possibly been explained as a form of mass psychosis if the patients hadn't fallen into a coma. All of the patients died after the 7th day, although some were killed during the violence that erupted. Pfester writes that it's unknown how the contagion spreads or how long it takes from transmission to onset of symptoms. All staff at the hospital, he writes, are now in quarantine. Biohazard suits are worn during the removal of bodies and subsequent autopsies. Day 28. This is how it started. A pandemic that in time will be referred to by the public as the zombie virus. It will remain Disease X within the medical community, with its origins being unknown for a long time. It's presently suspected to be a product of genetic engineering, possibly a bioweapon used for bioterrorism. No one has laid claim to this as yet. Scientists do have some idea, thanks to autopsies, about the effects the virus has on the brain. Patients first become ill, with all patients experiencing vomiting. This, in part, could explain the fast transmission rates, since many of the patients vomited on each other and their surroundings. Then comes catastrophic loss of brain function, affecting cognitive functions first. In the autopsies, the patient's sensory cortex and hippocampus showed considerable damage. This likely resulted in auditory and visual hallucinations. The amygdala, as with much of the limbic system, becomes hyperexcitable. It's thought this creates an intense automatic rage response in the patients to any kind of stimulus. The recently discovered Bieber complex associated with the brain's so-called rage circuits also showed abnormalities. Moreover, frontal lobe damage explains why patients are profoundly disinhibited to the point of derangement. Damage to the temporal lobe can explain the resultant loss of speech, recognition, and short-term memory. It seems that the virus is airborne and likely transmissible from surfaces. It's believed that at first the host's immune system doesn't recognize the virus, so it moves toward the person's central nervous system without causing any initial symptoms. It's thought that patients can remain asymptomatic after transmission for possibly 9 to 12 days. It then replicates at an astonishing rate in nerve cells, eventually reaching the brain. After traveling to the peripheral and autonomic nervous systems, it gets into the salivary glands, from where it's transmitted to the next person. The excitotoxicity of the brain eventually leads to seizures followed by paralysis, coma, and death. So far, it's untreatable and has a 100% fatality rate. Day 155. The most lethal pathogen the world has ever seen almost definitely originated in a lab. But which lab is unknown. Scarier still, infected people are now turning up all over the world, always in small pockets. It's as if it's being transported to specific areas. Some government officials in the US have been talking within their circle and blaming China, saying patient zero was perhaps not of Thai origin but coming from its neighbor. Still, no one who is at the mental hospital in Chiang Mai, so far at least, can be connected with someone who had recently traveled to China. Since the virus shows no symptoms at first and then leads to rapid destruction of the patient's brain, not much information could be gathered from them. The major problem is that no test has yet been created to detect the virus in its early stages. Scientists are able to hypothesize its pathogenesis, development in the body, but do not understand the nature of its stealth. It remains chimeric, and even the most advanced electron microscopy has so far failed to isolate it. Day 180. With seemingly impossible long-distance airborne dispersal and its hypertransmissibility, a chosen selection of top scientists who'd been given the data are saying they're more or less sure it's someone or some country engineering a perfect killing machine. Whoever did this wants to destroy civilization. Even so, the public for the most part has not been extensively informed. Where the virus has hit, the areas have been quickly contained and news suppressed as much as possible. The governments of the world that have been properly informed about the virus understand the public panic that will surely arise if the virus is explained in full. That is, a rabies-like rage virus that has perhaps been designed to have the transmission traits of the common flu. Explaining this to the public would throw the entire world into chaos. Information has leaked, though albeit with mixed, vague narratives. This hasn't stopped the media from printing what would usually be hyperbolic headlines designed to attract hits through fear. The Daily Mail in the UK recently ran the headline, "New Zombie Virus Has Scientists Baffled." An online article right next to it titled, "Kim Kardashian?" featured photos of the celebrity's new cosmetic surgery catastrophe, has way more hits. That same day, the Sun newspaper ran the headline, "Apocalypse Ni Hao. China is hiding a top-secret zombie virus." The Sun story was also overshadowed by Kardashian's surgery story, which has provided the governments of the world with some relief. Outside of the tabloid media, the next story mentioned in passing is a conspiracy theory. The New York Times wrote, "What next? Reddit becomes hub for zombie virus misinformation." Day 234. A young man named Dwayne Brady has just been released from isolation at California San Quentin prison. The so-called monster of Mountain View, a genius some say, is taking responsibility for the zombie virus, now talked about extensively in all media. The Times has changed its tune about being a conspiracy theory. Brady is a recently arrested serial killer who, while working in Google's Brain Team department, stalked top executives in the Mountain View area of California and murdered them, 16 in all. After secretly drugging them, he'd take them back home and perform brain surgery on them, implanting devices into various parts of the brain in an attempt to create a neural interface. All of them, of course, died, including Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, who Brady later joked had his first taste of the metaverse. Brady was also quick to add he definitely was human, though. Brady believed he was on the cusp of creating a brain-machine interface more advanced than anyone had previously imagined. But an investigation revealed that while he was an intelligent man with an IQ of 158, he was also completely insane. The authorities said his human brain interface amounted to nothing but torture and was totally useless to science. It just so happened that the first cases of Disease X in the US happened at San Quentin. It struck like lightning. And even though a full lockdown was implemented after the first attacks, it was too late. Infected prisoners lunged at each other in their cells, tearing out eyes and biting the flesh off each other's faces, just as happened in Thailand. The entire prison was closed, but before that, most of the 3,000 prisoners were dead, as well as scores of staff. Only some prisoners in isolation cells survived. One of them was Brady, a prisoner on death row. After the bodies were removed from the prison, he and other survivors were put in quarantine and interviewed. That's when Brady claimed that he invented the virus, but pretty much anything else he said was delusional and sometimes nonsensical. Brady said he was the second coming told by God to rid the world of most of its people, who for too long had embraced evil and greed. Tech executives were at the top of the pile. But the question remained, how did it get into the prison? San Quentin employed hundreds of correctional officers and hundreds more free staff, and thousands of prisoners had been visited during the time frame the virus could have infected the first person. Day 300. On a wall outside New York City's Grand Central Terminal, someone has written the words of the now deceased biochemist Wendell Meredith Stanley. If a killing type of virus strain should suddenly arise by mutation, it could, because of the rapid transportation in which we indulge nowadays, be carried to the far corners of the earth and cause deaths of millions of people. The vandal has crossed out the M in million and added a B for billions. The street, usually packed with people, is silent. New York City is deadly quiet except one street corner. A man with an unkempt appearance is preaching to no one in particular. Newspapers below him on the sidewalk are whipped by the wind, each with weeks-old headlines, occasionally upturned, exposing such words as rage virus, still unknown, panic, power grid. Reading from the Book of Revelations, the man shouts, "And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every man according to their works." He stops for a second, looks around, and then screams, "Behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him." Year 2. It has been decided that due to ethical reasons, all prisoners in the U.S. must be released. There is now no staff to run the prisons. Dwayne Brady is now a free man. He's just moved into a house where an entire family has perished. How he hasn't contracted the virus himself is a mystery. Lockdowns are not working, masks are not working for the most part, people stay huddled indoors, their groceries being delivered by specially trained delivery officers. The people still going out to work are more than just essential, they're the ones who, if they don't work, society would collapse. Medical staff, power grid workers, water treatment facility workers, and importantly, the people who keep the computer servers running. Who would have thought that the metaverse would have been so useful? Much of the most essential work can be done remotely. But anarchy is happening in the streets. A large segment of society believes the virus is the work of a secret underground government, a new world order, which has decided to drastically depopulate the planet. There are militias walking in the streets, heavily armed in countries where guns are widespread. Some towns in Alabama, though, look pretty much the same. In the US, these army militias live together, forming what looks like cults, often taking what they want with the help of their powerful firearms. In the UK, such gangs are even seen walking around with swords and clubs. Houses are burning, government buildings are burning. Today in the UK's north, a street battle takes place between two groups, the National Defence League, NDL, and the Leeds Headhunters. Each of these gangs will contract the virus at some point and members will turn on each other. Society's on the brink of collapse, all over the globe. Year 3. Those that survive are the ones with enough money to live in underground bunkers. The few people out on the streets live each day in peril. People are now effectively hunters and gatherers, a regression to a distant past. The ones that can best survive are the few who never really stopped being hunters and gatherers, small societies that are nomadic or live in small groups far from the rest of society. The population of India, now less than 60 million. China doesn't have many more people. The US is down to 3 million. Australia is a wasteland, and there are survivors who live on some of the country's most inhabitable areas. During the initial stages of the pandemic, the US president lived in a bunker under the White House called the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. Life there wasn't sustainable over a long period of time, so by using tunnels, he and his closest staff boarded a helicopter and flew to a series of enormous bunkers that were built years ago at Area 51. There are about 1,500 people here. Politicians, doctors, scientists, military, engineers, and also some of the wealthiest people in the US, despite some of them having no discernible skills. It's the same with the British royals and aristocracy, who collectively haven't yet managed to understand how to work the bunker's microwave ovens. Many other nations have selected people hidden in state-of-the-art bunkers. Various male and female animals are also kept on underground farms. From Area 51, the military remotely controls powerful drones that scan cities all over the US. Attack drones bomb or shoot any large groups of infected people, but take out those that are not infected too. The question is, do they launch a nuclear strike and wait for the dust to settle before venturing out to finish off the rest, thereby being able to reboot society with hopefully no virus around? After all, viruses can't live without hosts. The nuclear powers of the world talk in detail about launching their arsenal of weapons. There's no rush, though. There are enough vegetables and meat that can sustain life grown in underground labs and farms in the bunkers. Generating electricity is possible with solar, wind, water, steam, and even human poop. The outside world is now black at night, making survival for the few that are left difficult. The population now is in the tens of thousands. Year 4. Scientists are still no nearer to solving the mystery of where the virus came from. What's strange is that even though it seems to kill 99.99% of people, there are people alive that shouldn't be, including Dwayne Brady. While surveying the world outside, scientists hypothesize that a handful of people must have natural immunity. If only they could examine those people, they might be able to find out why they have immunity and create a vaccine. They've had their eyes on Brady, who has come into contact with the dying on a few occasions, at least before he had to shoot them. Year 5. They eventually do contact Brady and manage to get him to the bunker via a passenger drone. But it turns out he is a carrier of the disease, only he's asymptomatic. He infects a number of doctors who of course infect each other. Part of the bunker is soon covered in blood and bits of shorn flesh, but thankfully precautions have been taken that one section is closed off. Brady only survives by his wits, hiding until the devastation has stopped and all the infected are dead. On this day, he's pleading to the CCTV cameras to allow him into the village, the larger bunkers that house everyone. Now scientists understand that the people who remain outside could also be asymptomatic carriers of the virus. This is bad news. They will need to stay in bunkers much longer. Year 2050. The survivors in the bunkers have been procreating for reasons of sustaining the human race. Such matchups are not based on any kind of attraction, but only on genetic diversity. Children are born into this underground life. The general term now used for all these survivors is the descendants. Everything they do, everything they write, everything they learn, in fact, all human knowledge they can summon, is written into a book called Legacy. If everyone does die, or most people at least, this book, bound in cast iron, might be found later. By humans, who knows, possibly by aliens. It contains all the knowledge and thoughts of every survivor in the world, being a collaborative effort between countries only possible because some computer servers can still function with the help of robots. There are many disagreements in the history part, but in the end, countries always come to an agreement. On the outside, the hunters and gatherers, now called the remnants, survive best they can. The survivors that live on the peripheries of the world are called the relics, although unfortunately at times, some of them get too close to towns outside their havens and unwittingly bring the virus back to their villages. Year 2150. Everyone that was around at the start of the pandemic is now dead, although children have been born to the remnants and the relics as well as the descendants. Those that survive are born into an era that's now referred to as the hard times. The question remains, how many infected are left outside of their safe havens? When the descendants leave the bunker this year, they begin to kill off all the remnants, assuming that they might be asymptomatic carriers. These descendants have state-of-the-art weaponry. The remnants do not. Year 2151. A long discussion between the descendants of the world about what to do with the relics starts. It's almost certain they are not carriers, but even if one of them is, it could lead to a disaster and the end of the human race. After months of deliberation, a new chapter in Legacy is added. This is called the Culling. All known relic survivors that are reachable are massacred during this year. At this point, the cities and towns of the world have become inhabited by wildlife. Some are almost totally reclaimed by magnificent forests. Bears walk through New York City. Large troops of monkeys live in apartment buildings in Tokyo. The oceans are teeming with fish. Birds nest in the hallways of what was once the British Parliament buildings. There have been massive oil spills, though, as well as chemical leaks and nuclear explosions. The world, as it is for the descendants, is one marked by danger. Food is not much of a problem, even though not much remained of what was once cattle. They get their meat by hunting, and at least the new world is rich with vegetation, some of it edible. Year 2201. Many of the cities as people knew them were flooded a long time ago. Now rivers run through major streets, with crocodiles in some places living in what used to be subway stations. The abundance of water has eroded metal structures, with many roads and buildings having already collapsed. Many bridges all over the world no longer stand. In France, the Eiffel Tower is now the Eiffel Stump. A descendant actually made that joke. Some cities have been razed. Wildfires have started by the abundance of twigs and leaves hit with strikes of lightning. The surviving artifacts are now mainly the strongest stone structures, but many of them are hidden in the growth. Some places like Las Vegas are shrouded in the sand. For the first time in thousands of years, elephants and rhinoceroses are now seen on the continent of Europe. These animals, as well as the abundance of other fauna that's spread into places where it hasn't been in a long time, pose a danger to the descendants, and some former cities are now no-go areas. The descendants become scavengers of technology, taking what's still useful from the past. None of these descendants know what it would have been like to live in what they call the old world, but thanks to Legacy, they have sufficient knowledge to build and create. They understand things like cultural values. They know about wars and what it was like to have a life with incredible comfort. They can understand what humans back then would have considered their natural rights, such as a warm meal, a comfortable bed, and a day that isn't considered survival. These descendants have decided that after the culling, they should not harm each other, ever, if they are to have a chance to build a new world. The old world, they say, was built on greed and consumerism. The new world, they say, should have its foundations built on love and security. They understand what war means, but it makes no sense to them at all. Year 2301. The Second New World War has just finished, and it's wiped out much of the population. How did this happen? For the most part, a schism occurred where two large groups of descendants disagreed about various interpretations of Legacy. One man, a descendant in England named James Harris, decided the most important person in Legacy was Dwayne Brady, now His Holiness to some. Harris says if Brady had been allowed back into the village, he would have shared his endless knowledge, but instead they killed him. Brady, says Harris, had been working on scientific solutions to what had been the most pressing human problems. They made him an outcast for killing people, when all he'd been doing was ridding the world of a hierarchy of tech oligarchs whose purpose was to enslave men to their products. Brady had explained to people that he was on a mission from God, but he was called crazy for that and persecuted. Brady wasn't a criminal, says Harris, but a genius who sacrificed himself for the greater good of mankind. He was the real hero of Legacy. Hence Harris's groundbreaking work, The Book of Dwayne. Different societies have different takes. Some descendants in Asia believe a man named Thitiporn Bangsabat had been sent down to Earth to begin what they call the Rapture. This is how the Great Virus started, they say. How else could it have begun, they ask. In this interpretation, Brady is nothing but a minor character, albeit since he survived, it's written in some books he was the devil leading a force of dark angels, the other asymptomatics. During a dark period of the century, suspected Brady worshippers are hunted down like animals, tortured, and killed. The ones doing the killing, the so-called punishers of justice, say Brady was the reason for the culling, which was a massacre of the purest people on Earth, now called the Innocents in this interpretation. The Innocents are worshipped by some people who have chosen to live as the Innocents did, Puritans who have no time for new technologies. They believe they'll be saved when the next rapture happens, which is expected in year 2392. Year 2401. The last century was a century of wars, but this one is more peaceful. There are now at least 100 religions throughout the world, with thousands of denominations of those religions. The stories are vast and complex in their narratives, with countless beliefs having now been formed not specifically related to Legacy. The stories of Legacy, many people now believe, are a mere superstition. They say that people such as Brady might not have even existed, and were written in Legacy purely as metaphor. They say the same about the Great Plague of 2022. Balderdash, they say. Nothing like that happened. Also, they say that humanity has much bigger things to think about, such as cooling of the Earth, which they say could lead to human extinction in the next 50 years. Year 2701. Much of the wildlife that was plentiful 1,000 years ago has become extinct due to hunting and habitat destruction. But in terms of social development, the world is a much better place. Brilliant technologies are making people's lives better, and there's little severe poverty left in the world of 3 billion people. It's a positive year indeed. And there's a reason people are calling this the golden era of human history. Civilization is finally back on its feet. Year 2702. 18-year-old Trevor, or Trev to his now deceased friends, is starving, literally. He's sick with disease. His lungs are poisoned, his legs are weak and scarred. He thinks he's the last man on Earth. There could be more, he knows that, but there won't be soon enough. Clutched between his fingers is a worn-out and partly burnt copy of Legacy he had stolen from school a while back. He keeps reading the same chapter over and over again. History, the tech explosion, 2000 onwards. Part of the text reads, "Just prior to the Great Plague of 2022, humans in general made some remarkable progress. The days of famine were almost over. And while poverty still existed in poorer areas of the world, most people had access to food and clean water. Life expectancy was over 75 in developed nations, although a more sedentary lifestyle and a proliferation of unhealthy food had led to a rise in certain diseases such as diabetes and coronary heart disease." Trevor smiles, exposing black, broken teeth. He puts a dirty finger over one line he's read multiple times. Nonetheless, the hard, brutal work that teenagers were forced to endure just a century earlier had become a thing of the past in most nations. Many of them lived in relative luxury compared to their forebears, spending sometimes hours a day watching videos on the YouTube platform. See Chapter 4. YouTube, Trevor mutters under his breath, as he looks outside his crumbling shack at the dust cloud that had once been a blue sky. Imagine, he thinks, having food, all kinds of food, available at the push of a button. Imagine spending so much time watching videos. He tries to think about what such videos would look like. In the year 2702, in the month of March, an asteroid hit the Earth. They knew it was coming, but were unable to do anything about it. It was more than 10 kilometers across, bigger than the one mentioned in Legacy that was said to have killed off the dinosaurs. It made contact with the Earth, traveling at around 30,000 miles per hour. Just a few hours after impact, the planet was turned into a living hell. Fires spread over great tracts of land. Cities crumbled. This set off a series of shockwaves and devastating earthquakes, creating in turn giant tsunamis that swallowed cities. The massive plumes of dust the impact created blocked out the sunlight, and soon the Earth was totally enveloped by a dark cloud. On the surface, anywhere close to the impact crater was a hellscape. Every last person died quickly. They had no chance at all. Ejecta from the blast, the stuff on Earth thrown into the air, came back down in flames, killing people far and wide. Cities burned, forests burned, and the oceans were contaminated. As time went on, all over the world, most of the vegetation was destroyed by the toxic dust. For a while, survivors ate what they could, but the food was never going to last. As temperatures dropped, acid rain fell from the sky. Without light for photosynthesis, animals and plants died out. Only the smaller animals that could get underground had a chance. Humans were not prepared. Their numbers fell until there was hardly anyone left. Trevor closes his eyes and tries to ignore the flames in the distance. He closes his ears to try to deafen the sound of toxic rain falling on his shack. If only, he thinks, if only he could somehow go back to the 2000s. He probably would go outside and dance under the magical branches of a blooming tree and marvel over the sublime beauty of a simple piece of fruit. Take off his clothes and let the warm wind massage his unscarred back. He'd go back inside and lie down on a soft bed with fluffy goose-down pillows and appreciate the peace and tranquility of life. Something then tickles his feet and brings him out of his sweet reverie. It's a cockroach. Another. These things are everywhere now. He grits his teeth and pounds it with his filthy blood-stained fist, smashing its disgusting exoskeleton into little viscous shards. God, he thinks, I hate this world, as he throws Legacy outside into the fire. Now you need to watch why it would suck to live through the end of the universe, or see if you could kickstart mankind with could two people actually repopulate Earth?